Once again, I work at a nursing home as a security guard overnight on a 12-hour shift for well over a year now. And I've had paranormal stuff happen to me, but I didn't think anything of it most of the time because I'm tired most nights. But something started about a week ago that scared me at first, but then ended up quite sad after thinking about it for a while. So lately, we've been getting complaints from residents in the hall about knocking on their doors in the middle of the night around midnight in the morning to 3. They described it as a slow, heavy knocking that knocked only twice. At first we thought the building was settling because we had just put on a new roof, because of hail damage. Others just believed it was something in the vents, but that couldn't be possible, considering that the knock would have been followed by an echo after hitting metal. Then, I heard the knocking for myself and it scared the hell out of me. I couldn't find where it came from, nor did I find what it was. After an hour, it got me thinking. So, we had this couple that lived in apartment 1202. The side that I work on consists of 2 wings. There's a 1400 wing and a 1200. Each wing consists of 3 stories. The stories that they lived on was the first story. The wife had a drinking problem, and she would get drunk, and around midnight to 3 in the morning, and go around knocking on people's doors. At the time, Greg, one of my co-workers who switched to a daytime position, was working. His only job was to make sure she didn't leave her room. The wife soon after passed away on November 7th, 2018, in the building. And then a year later in September 2019, the husband passed away in a hospital. Within the year that his wife died, he switched to a DNR, do not resuscitate. After that, I was the only person to talk to him. He used to come out around 2 to 3 in the morning and sit in the cafe area drinking coffee. He would always go back to his room before everyone started to come out. From what he told me, he just wanted to be with his wife. He was always so sad when I sat down to talk to him. Since she died in the building and he died in the hospital, I think she wanders the halls where she used to, trying to find him since it's around the time he and she died. It's a super sad story, and I wish her the best. It doesn't freak me out anymore because I know the story behind the knocking. Stuff like this is bound to happen in a nursing home, and I hope one day they find each other. So I work the night shift. I've worked here for nearly 9 months and the building is 4 years old. I'm the security guard that keeps an eye out for the independent living side of the building. I work alone. The building is huge. There are 4 wings, 1400, 1200, 1100 and 1000. And 3 of the wings have 3 stories to them. Not to mention the ungodly long hallways with nothing but doors on each side, and the little dolls that the residents put outside their door. The residents just think the dolls are cute, but they creep me out. The first month I worked here, I heard some stories about the building being haunted. Now in my mind I'm like, there's no way this building is haunted, it's only 4 years old. God, did I regret that thought. I've had multiple encounters with noises and hearing breathing that wasn't mine, or footsteps that got progressively louder and faster. Anyway, 6 months later, something happened to me that freaked me out. Bone chilling. I was delivering packages around 1:30 a.m, so it's dark outside, almost pitch black. We have this cart that all the packages get put on and wait to get delivered. I was dragging it through the hallway and I had to go up the elevator to the 2nd floor on the 1200 wing. There were 5 packages on the cart and they each needed to be delivered on a different side of the building. I picked one up to place it in front of the door and turn around to grab the handle on the cart. Well, I grabbed air. Realizing what just happened, I kinda just stood in shock for a second. I head back down to my office thinking maybe I'm just tired and was imagining delivering the packages. Well, the cart was still nowhere to be found. After an hour of looking for this cart, I was constantly checking the time because the packages needed to be delivered by 3 a.m. I sat down and put my hands over my face with my eyes closed for a second. I then opened my eyes, looked out the door of my office, and I was in disbelief. The cart was right there, with no packages. I couldn't believe it. I go walking around trying to find these packages, and to my knowledge, they are all delivered. I know I didn't deliver those packages. I thought I blacked out, but I couldn't have blacked out considering I was looking for the cart. I went home after my shift and couldn't sleep that day. I was in shock. Luckily, I had the next night off, so not sleeping didn't really hurt my schedule. This all started December 2018. My daughter, who was 4.5 at the time, wanted this doll for Christmas, and it was sold out, so we bought one only second-hand and it was brand new. The doll looked like your average baby doll. Plastic, movable arms and legs, brown hair and brown eyes that opened and closed with a big head. Typical little girl's doll. She was so excited on Christmas Day, since it was one of the things on top of her list. Everything was good for the first week. Then, little things started to happen. First, she started to take things and either ruin or his things. She never had a reason why she took things and ruined them until later. I got annoyed with it, but shrugged it off as a kid thing. Then she started waking up in the middle of the night at 2 a.m., 3 a.m, and odd times in between, and would want to sleep with us. This went on for a few weeks. Then she started saying weird things. She would tell us that the little girl was waking her up at 3 a.m. or 3:15. Now mind you, she was almost 5, but didn't have a clock in her room and also couldn't tell time. We shrugged this off as maybe she saw something on TV. She then started talking to us about how the man in her room wanted to take her to the clouds and how he makes her not feel good. This is when I started asking her questions. She said the little girl who came into her room always woke her up to play in the middle of the night. And this little girl would tell her to do bad things so she could be a bad girl. I asked her about the man, and she said the man scares her, but the little girl was her friend. She said the man told her he wanted to take her up into the clouds to be with him, and the little girl where they belong, and that he was the one who makes the dolls. She told us about a dream she had, where the little girl took her hand and lifted her up to show her where she lived. And while they were flying, she said she got scared and wanted to come home, and the little girl got upset with her. She would wake up with belly aches, and at one point, she said her lamp was making her dizzy and nauseous because the man was making it spin when she looked at it. She would always reference this doll when talking about it, saying they always played with the doll with her. After about 2 months of countless sleepless nights, nightmares, and a complete change in my daughter, the night her dad was in her room playing with her. He said the doll just looked creepy. He doesn't believe in any of this. So he took the doll and moved it. My daughter then hollered and said, "No, you can't be mean to her. You have to be nice. She'll get mad at you." He said, "Well, no, it's just a doll. It won't do anything." She told him, "Yes, it will. She tells me to do bad things. I don't want her to be mad at me anymore." He then took the doll again and said, "No, you don't listen to the doll. You only listen to me and Mommy." Now, he said after we moved the doll, he got a very bad feeling and an uneasy feeling. And the way the doll was positioned, it was just looking at him. We talked that night and decided to get rid of it. I took it from our house to my parents' community and tossed it in a dumpster. Oddly enough, after it was gone, things were fine. My daughter started sleeping again and hasn't spoken about being woken up. She did tell us her room was haunted about 6 months later, after she saw a lady in her window. We have since moved her bedroom into another room of the house, and nothing else has happened since. It was honestly the weirdest 2 to 3 months of our life. There were other little things that happened in that time, such as things moving, and I would feel uneasy, like someone was looking at me at times. We even had a house guest who slept in her room one night, and the next day, she told us she would never sleep in there again, and it was really creepy. She couldn't explain why. She just said she didn't sleep well, and it felt like someone was there. I'm now 50. I'm an electrical and electronics engineer, so I have a particular way of observing things, thinking about them, and explaining them. When I go on a job, I have to approach it logically and methodically, and work out what's really happening by testing, measuring, and observing. So I'm not taken to flights of fancy, and to this end, I don't actually believe in ghosts, even to this day. With my experience, I can't bring myself to overcome my years of training and my experience to believe in something that I can't explain. I think orbs in photos are obviously illuminated dust close to the lens. I think EVP is whatever someone wants to hear, and psychics are con men and women. I'm also not religious or spiritual. I think once you're gone, that's it. You're gone. This is my initial experience that I brushed off, and then my reassessment when my dad told me his story. This is 100% genuine, and when it happened, it terrified me. But when I tell anyone, they think it's funny or some kind of joke. I had put this totally behind me, but my dad, who's now well into his 70s, told me something recently that has made me question whether I'm kind of fooling myself. I just don't know what to think anymore. In 1985, my exam year, we moved from an old Victorian terrace into a new house. And it was new, built maybe 15 years earlier on the old fields. This is rural England. No Indian burial grounds, old graveyards, early English or Roman graves or anything silly like that. It was pasture fields for cows. Always had been and nothing else. When we moved in, I was 15, youngest in my year at school, and everything was great. Over time, I'd go through spells where I'd wake up feeling like I was being pushed into the bed, or wake up from a deep sleep. I sleep really deeply and never remember my dreams, while having a great dream, and feel instantly afraid like there was something dark, as in evil, in the room. Lots of stuff like this. It would go on for a few weeks and then nothing. A couple of months later, it would start all over again. I went to the library, bought books, talked to people. I came to the conclusion that it was sleep paralysis or something along those lines, because it always happened when I was either asleep or just about to fall asleep. This went on for ages. Then one night, when I was about 22 or 23, I was being on an evening shift. By the time I got home, it was about 11 p.m. My usual thing was to watch junk TV for a couple of hours or so to wind down. While doing this, to have a snack, have a few cups of tea, and then go to bed at 2 a.m.ish. So there I am, watching TV. Mum and Dad had gone to bed. The only door into the room is right by my right-hand side. There are big gardens to the front and rear of the room. No one there but me. I'm looking at an angle to my left watching TV, and suddenly to my right, I hear someone fart. This is where people start laughing, but I swear it isn't a joke. And I wasn't laughing. In the split second it took my head to turn from the TV to the sound of the farting, I'd already come to the conclusion my mum or dad must have walked into the room and farted. That's ludicrous for all manner of reasons. First, they're old school English. If they dropped one in public, they'd die of embarrassment. Second, there would be no reason for them to walk into that room unless they were going to sit and watch TV. And third, the door at my side was definitely and firmly closed still. I have to admit, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up because I was sure I'd heard it. But hey, I'm an engineer working in fields involving sound systems. And so since no one is there, and therefore no one can have farted, I must have imagined it, or it was a sound on the TV program. So I gingerly started watching TV again, even though I was a bit uncomfortable. I don't know how much later it was, 5, 10, 20 minutes later. I've just taken a sip of my cup of tea and have completely forgotten about what had happened. And I hear it again from the same place. But this time, I don't know if it was louder or clearer, or I was more edgy, but this time I am 100% sure that I definitely heard it. And this was not some sound on the TV or my imagination. I turn and look again and there's nothing there, but now the hairs on the back of my neck are really standing out. And as I'm sitting there wondering what the hell just happened, within a couple of seconds max, this smell appeared and it was vile. I can't even describe it. It wasn't a fart smell. But if you could ever smell a smell that made you think, the thing that did this wants to hurt you, that was the smell. I dumped my cup of tea on the coffee table, spun around and opened the door, shot out of it, shutting it behind me, ran to my room and sat there all night with the light on, saying the Lord's Prayer. And I'm not religious. I don't believe in God. It freaked me out so much. Over the last 30 plus years, I've played it down and down in my mind to the conclusion it can't have happened because ghosts don't exist. And that's what I've stuck with. Until a few weeks ago. And now I'm not sure at all. What happened is that my mum and dad moved from that house to an even newer one, about 10 years old. My dad's been ill with pneumonia, so since he's coughing up and spluttering all night, he's in one room and my mum is in the other. One night, my mum's asleep and she feels someone prodding her arm over and over again. She assumes it's my dad who isn't feeling well and is trying to wake her up. In a sleepy state, she says, "Yes, what do you want?" No answer. "What do you want?" No answer, and the prodding carries on. She wakes up and says, "What do you want?" And when she looks, there's an old woman standing there prodding her arm. Mum freaks out and hides under the covers. When she gathers the courage to look, no one there. Wakes up Dad. They go downstairs and turn the alarm off, downstairs only. No one there. Search the house. No one there. Freaky bit. I think my mum's imagining things and jokingly say to my dad a couple of weeks later, "Hey, maybe it's the ghost from the old house that's followed you." He says, "No, we didn't bring her with us." So I say, "What do you mean by her?" "Well, it was an old woman." "How do you mean?" "I saw her." Turns out he'd seen a ghost at the old house plain as day. He actually thought he'd left the front door unlocked and someone had wandered in. He was sitting in the kitchen, the door opened and she was standing looking at him. She turned around, literally a 90-degree turn, and walked into the living room, where I had my experience. He followed her in. One door in, nowhere to hide, yet no one was there. He'd always told me he'd seen things out of the corner of his eye, but thought he must be imagining it, but never this. Talking to my sister, who'd moved out maybe 5 years before all of this, she said, "Oh yeah, he told me that years ago, but he didn't say anything to you, because he thought you and Mum would be scared and would want to move house, and he couldn't afford to." So there I am, thinking I'm going mad, deciding I'm imagining things, and all along my blinking dad had seen it and knew it was real. So what does this mean? Was it a ghost? Do ghosts exist? I've never had another experience since I moved out, and I still can't bring myself to accept it as a ghost over some other more rational explanation. I mean, why would a blinking ghost fart? And how could it? At 50 years old, I just can't accept ghosts are real, and there isn't always a logical scientific explanation, even if it isn't obvious. I've had no other ghostly encounters since. That's a good 20 plus years ago. Probably 25 plus years ago. Last night I'm asleep in bed, lying on my right hand side. I had a weird dream. And no, I haven't been watching scary movies. In my dream, I'm in a weird American apartment full of bookshelves and antique books. And I'm showing some antique books to some prospective buyers. I think this probably comes from watching an episode of Elementary involving a stolen antique map that morning. Suddenly in my dream, I'm aware that a spirit wants to get me, but it's gone into the apartment next door by mistake. I know it sounds mad. I do not know why I'm dreaming about spirits or anything related to them. Next thing I know, and completely unrelated to my dream, I'm waking up because I've just been smashed in the head at full force by what felt like a pillow. Like someone has taken a pillow, raised it right above their head, and hit me at full throttle as hard as they can on the side of my head. I felt the thwack. My ear pressure changed like my ear almost popped from it hitting me side on, and I felt the thump on my head. I woke up instantly and kind of tried to say something like, "What?" But all that my mouth could manage was a load of gibberish. At the same time, the hairs on the back of my neck stood out like crazy. I daren't turn around to see if someone was there. It scared the bejesus out of me. It wasn't part of my dream. It was kind of related to the theme of my dream, but I had a real-world reaction to it, like I was properly slapped in the head in real life and felt it, and instantly woke up from my dream. It in no way fitted in with my dream. It was odd. I'm torn between thinking it was real, or my brain is just imagining things. If it wasn't a pillow I was hit with, if I was hit by anything, they hadn't moved. But it felt like getting hit over the head with one. It was that kind of thwack. This was at 4 a.m.-ish British time. I hope I don't have any more experiences tonight. I can't be going through all that again. Since I was little, a spirit or being has been protecting my family. I don't know what kind, but it wants to stay. I didn't know about this until I was an adult, when my mum and I got talking about our ghost experiences one day. Some background. I've lived in 3 homes. The first I don't remember because we moved when I was a couple months old. The second I lived in until I was a sophomore in college. The third I lived in, still with my family, from junior year until now. A year after my graduating. In the second and third house, there have always been some areas in the houses that felt strange, creepy, like someone was intently watching you, but not unwelcoming. Still, it was strong enough that I didn't like these areas at night when I was a kid. In my second house, it was the hallway that led to a dead-end laundry room, the kitchen that hallway was attached to, and my parents' bedroom. Similarly, in my third house, the feeling was in the kitchen, my parents' bedroom, and the stairs. I never saw the spirit, not that I remember, but somehow I knew it was very tall and skinny. He only sometimes had very short horns. I never had a reason to feel any creepiness from these areas because I never saw anything there. Or so I thought. I had never told anyone about the feeling or the spirits until my mum and I started talking about ghosts one day, and I mentioned it. Without missing a beat, my mum says, "Oh, that's the old grandpa." Mum then proceeded to explain the exact feeling I would get, in the same areas of the house. She also explained he was very tall, but that's all she knew about him. She told me this spirit has been following her since she was little. She experienced similar feelings in areas of her childhood homes, but never thought much of it until she moved into my and my parents' first home. When I was a baby, I would frequently wake up in the middle of the night and cry. Mum would get up, turn on a light, breastfeed me, and then put me to bed and turn out the light. One night, my mum woke up with the feeling of creepiness I described, but extremely intense. She got up to check on me, since it was about the time of night that I would wake up. This time, she didn't turn the light on, not wanting to wake me if I was still asleep, and I was. As she was watching me, she heard something, a tapping on the window. Slowly, then a little louder and faster, just enough for me to wake up and start crying. As soon as I did, the sound abruptly stopped. A quick visit from the police revealed a peeping Tom would tap at the window at night to wake me, and then he would watch my mum feed me. My parents moved within the next couple of weeks. The spirit followed my mum to the second house, where I grew up. She credits several instances of warning before danger to the spirit. One example is her waking up to that feeling before an attempted home invasion. Nowadays, in our third home, we live in a much safer area, so nothing like that has happened to my knowledge. When I asked if she knew why he appeared in the kitchen in her bedroom, she laughed and said, "Look, he's creepy and kind of a perv, but he's harmless." She does say not to be surprised if he starts following me around when I have kids. He'll want to help protect. That's why she calls him the old grandpa. Now, my experiences with him, they're mostly the energy I feel from him, rarely anything more. One time when I was in middle school, I was doing dishes in the kitchen of my second house, and I had one earbud in and the other out. Why? I could feel that feeling, and I was trying my best not to look over my shoulder down the hallway every minute or so. The one earbud was out to hear if anyone walked up behind me. Dumb. I know. Then, through the earbud that was still in my ear, it started as a whisper. I nearly had a heart attack, yanked out my earbud, and started down the hallway. Nothing. Never knew what that was about, but now I assume it was him. One last thing of interest. When I moved to my apartment for college, I never felt his presence. And I've never felt it outside the 2 houses I remember. My mom, however, has felt it only in one place in the world outside of her home. Scotland. My heritage is Scottish on both my mom and dad's side. Even so, we decided to take a trip there. One of the places we visited was the burned down and currently being restored Dunans Castle, also known as Fletcher Castle. We were signing our family in for the tour, but our guide stops us when he sees our name. As in the Scottish version? When we confirmed yes, our guide smiled and said, "I've got a surprise for you then." On the side of the castle is a plaque of 2 hands shaking, and both the Fletcher and our family name on it, along with the inscription, "Nicadu." From what I remember, Our family back in the day and the Fletcher family helped each other in times of need. That trip was a few years ago, and I never felt anything. But later during our ghost storytelling, my mom told me she felt the old grandpa there. That's the reason I've started calling him the Scottish Gaelic word for grandpa, Cianair. Nowadays, he hangs out. Ever since that day talking with my mom, when I mentioned being really freaked out in certain areas of the house, I don't feel his presence much anymore in those areas. Almost as if he felt bad for freaking me out. I almost never feel him in the kitchen anymore, and instead of being at the top of the stairs, I only feel him at the bottom, and only when I'm going to bed. He still likes my parents' bedroom a lot, but I'm almost never in there. Whenever I mention him to others now, and even as I'm writing this, I get overcome with a feeling of statickiness in my limbs, and a cottony feeling in my head, like dizzy in a good way, which is a little strange. I'm not sure what it all means. I don't know if he's actually Scottish, or what kind of spirit he is. But other than emanating a kind of creepy energy, he actually seems to be doing more good than harm here. So I'm happy to have him. To begin, I don't think I believe in the paranormal. It's a family trait that we scoff at anything like that, despite all having our share of odd stories and small encounters. Our opinion of religion and the supernatural has always been one of stoic agnosticism. Regardless, there are family stories that get told again and again, usually to guests in the late of night, with a bubbly haze of booze in the air. My family moved to Ireland around 2000. We moved into an incredibly old and almost dilapidated house on the west coast. It's around here where this history with potentially supernatural occurrences began. I'll begin with our family's ghost story, the one that began it all. I don't really know time frames, but it must have been within our first year of living in the house. My mother is not a believer in the paranormal, but at the same time, she's not a stranger to it. Our house had a large front garden, with a small path that ran straight down the middle from the road to the front door. Our kitchen overlooks this. It's a big room with large, uncurtained windows. Quite spooky at night. Attached to the kitchen is a playroom that faces out the back of the house, and likewise has massive, uncurtained windows. Every now and then, my mother would glimpse a lady in white through the kitchen window, walking down the path towards the door. The first few times, she went to greet the lady but found no one there. These sightings continued, and she would either see the lady walking down the path, or catch a glimpse of something white passing directly by the window. She ignored these and never brought it up with my father. One day, however, they were both in the kitchen, and again my mother saw the flash of something white glide by the window. Used to it by this point, she said nothing and continued with whatever she was doing. But then my father said, unprompted, "I wish that bloody woman would go away." It was then she realised that she wasn't seeing things, and for the first time, they both acknowledged the presence of this woman. Things escalated from there. My father began seeing this woman, except now he would see her passing by the back windows in the playroom sometimes, which overlooked some fields that led to the sea. I think by this point he was getting freaked out. One night in particular, he said he watched the lights flicker on and off in the room, and watched the woman go back and forth in front of that window for ages. While that seemed like the bubbling point, the real turning point involved 3-year-old me. One day, I was playing on my own in the living room. This has another large window facing out into a little walled-off section round the back of the house. It was always overgrown and wild, as it was impossible to get a lawnmower to that point. My mother heard me screaming bloody murder. Before she could even get to me, I was flying out the room in utter hysterics, and unable to speak coherently. I kept screaming about a massive white bird that had been standing and peering at me through the back window while I played. At this point, they decided to do something and got someone. I don't think it was a priest, but maybe a local who was religious, to visit the house and ultimately bless it. After that, the haunting stopped. Now, we had a strange situation with the house. Due to some family issues, we ended up moving out of that house after a couple of years. My parents separated, and me and my siblings spent a few years moving around to different houses and areas on the west coast of Ireland. Eventually, we moved back into this house. and I spent the remainder of my teenage years living there with my mother. To keep things brief though, I'm just going to list everything weird I can that happened between the story above to how the situation has weirdly continued with my youngest sister, who lives in that big old house alone with my mother now. My father has another wild story from when we first lived in that house. Not sure when it happened exactly. Nearby to that house, along a path leading to the nearby beach, is a house notorious for being strange. This is about a 90-second walk away. A lot of the more superstitious locals genuinely think it's evil. It was built by a man for his family, and something bad happened, but I can't remember what. So for as long as I've known, it's been uninhabited. One night, my father was walking our dog and was heading to the beach. It had just gotten dark, so the land was black, but the sky still had a touch of deep blue to it. As he passed this house, he looked over to it and was shocked to see that in the field directly behind it was a large mass, like a big shadow, swirling round in the field. He could just see it silhouetted against the sky. He said it almost looked like a flock of birds, but was more concentrated shadow, and it just flowed round in a circle around the edges of this field. The other problem he had with it was that it was completely silent. He watched it for a while in shock. However, the dog didn't react. Eventually, he bailed. My parents also have a story that I remember them clearly telling some guests we had over one night, but I have since asked my mother about it, and she can't recall it. In our house, their bedroom was directly above the kitchen. One night, they heard a great mass of moving things and animal-like noises. I remember their description so well, because as a kid it freaked me out. They described it as sounding as if a tiger was going through the dishwasher, as in taking them plates and moving them about. After moving out, me and my sisters moved into another house with my mother's new partner. It was again quite old, but weirdly Spanish in its design. I remember it having iron sheets with bulls inlaid in the wall, and a black iron spiral staircase leading to the second floor. Me and my sisters have all agreed that that house was haunted, but we only openly talked about this opinion many years later. It was when we all admitted this that I suddenly got the realization that what I used to see as a kid in that house might have, well, not been my imagination. I remember very distinctly how almost every night I would be terrified of a silhouette that stood in the corner of my room where the door was. The door opened inwards, so it stood in the exact spot that would be hidden if the door was opened. But I slept with the door shut, and when my eyes would adjust to the dark, I'd always be able to see the shadow. It led me to having to come up with coping mechanisms to deal with the monsters in the room. I convinced myself I was safe from it, as long as I always pretended to be asleep. I would secretly be staring at it for ages. In this same Spanishy house, one night we all headed out somewhere, leaving our dog behind. I don't remember what we did, but we arrived home late and found that for some reason, every single window in the house was swung wide open. Every single one. I remember sitting on my bed while everyone searched the house, and my older sisters coming into my room and checking under the bed. The explanation was that the dog had somehow learned to open the windows and had done it while we were out. Now skip forward to when me, my mother, and my two younger sisters moved back into the coastal Irish house a few years later. I'll list off all the weird things, although more minor, that happened here. One morning, I came and sat in bed with my mother. My younger sisters were downstairs. At some point, she got up and went downstairs to join them. I was reading a large book, and although I could see the doorway clearly, it was just large enough that it obscured my view of the floor there. After some time, I jumped when I suddenly heard a singular note being played on a toy keyboard that we'd gotten at some point. I looked, and there it was, sat perfectly straight in the middle of the doorway, where I hadn't seen it before. The key wasn't moving, but a single note was repeatedly coming through the speakers. I got up, turned it off, and went down to my sister. I grilled her about where exactly she'd left the keyboard, and she swore over and over again that it had been left downstairs with them. This could have just been a prank, although I at no point saw anyone stand in the doorway and place it. I slept in the room that had the hatch to the attic. My bed was a bunk bed, but with a desk instead of the bottom bunk. This means I slept about 3 feet below the ceiling, and the hatch was over my feet. On multiple occasions, I awoke to find the hatch lifted and slid open. This hatch was just a thick slab of wood that loosely sat in a frame to cover the hole. It had to be lifted about 3 inches up before you could slide it to the side. Still, it could have just been air currents. It's a big and breezy house. Some minor things. As a kid about 5 years old, my sister once accidentally cut her wrist while washing a glass. My whole family rushed her over to our neighbour, a retired nurse, and I for some reason stayed at home. It was night. They were only gone for about 15 minutes, but while they were gone, I heard someone knock on the front door using the heavy iron door knocker attached to it. I was scared, so I pushed a crate against the door and looked through the eye hole. No one was there. I didn't open the door. I specifically once felt myself get poked in the back one day while in my room. Could have been a muscle spasm, I guess. We used to have a wicker chair that would creak as if being sat in at night when I was the last one up. I figured it was something to do with the wicker settling, as we frequently had fire instead of radiators. I once saw a translucent foot that almost looked cartoony, like the foot of the Marshmallow Man walking around the corner towards me. However, it vanished after a second, and I brushed it off. The biggest story. One night, my older sister was visiting. We stayed up late watching Marble Hornets, and thoroughly creeped out, went to bed late. The electrics in the house were always pretty bad, so my mother grilled us kids about the habit of switching everything off before bed, in case of bad electricity causing a fire. As we went to bed, I locked up and switched everything off. About 20 minutes into trying to fall asleep, I suddenly heard my dog barking. I crept out onto the landing and saw the dog sitting at the opposite side of the stairs, opposite to where he'd actually walked down them, and staring down below. I quickly noticed that the kitchen door was wide open, despite locking it, and the kitchen light was now on. Not only that, but the front door was now swung wide open too. Having just spent an hour watching Marble Hornets, I was freaked out. Took my dog down with me and relocked everything and switched everything off again. Went to bed, imagining the Slender Man loping around the hallway below me. One night, my mother and her boyfriend said they'd heard 2 people talking in the kitchen while they tried to sleep. I don't know why neither of them ever got up to check it out. I didn't really ask. A couple of days later, we found that the wire we used to tie the front gate shut, to stop my baby sister from getting out onto the road, had been cut. I'm sure nothing paranormal. Some people probably just came into our house. It's still weird the wire was cut, as the gate was only a few feet tall and easy to hop over. Completely unnecessary to cut the wire. This is probably my most unbelievable one, and I generally don't tell people this unless I believe they're very open-minded for that reason. There's no point telling it to people I think won't believe it. It wasn't a dream. I'm not superstitious. I just can't explain it. One night, 15, 16 years old, I couldn't sleep. My bedroom at this point was a large room at the back of the house. It had large windows. I couldn't sleep though. I felt like I could hear something, but there was no discernible noise. I just had the feeling that there was some kind of sound or vibration, but it was so faint, I convinced myself it was imaginary. Still, it didn't go, and the feeling was so persistent that I got up and went to the window. I pressed my ear to it and realized there was definitely some kind of vibration. Now curious, I went downstairs and quietly opened the front door. What greeted me in the night was completely different. It was a loud thumping noise that filled up the entire night. I mean loud. I don't understand how it wasn't more audible from my room. It was deep and bassy and rhythmically thumping. Basically, just like if you were at a festival. It sounded like the bass drum from a dance track, and about that loud too. But I'm standing in the middle of rural Ireland. All that surrounds me is fields, old abandoned stone houses, and 60-year-old farmers. It's also like 3 a.m. Excited and curious, I rushed back inside, and being a lame teenager, I dressed myself head to toe in black, put on a face mask, and snuck outside. I head into my front garden and hop the wall onto the road, following this massive thumping sound that just reverberates in your chest. It sounded like a heartbeat. I don't have to go far. On the opposite side of the road, it's a long abandoned house. Now you see these a lot in the Irish countryside. These old abandoned stone houses that have fallen through and been left to rot in the weather for 100 years. This is one of those houses, thatched roof and all. It's a small old farmhouse, and it's got a walled-off field attached to the back. Inside that field is a stone/cement hut. I don't know what it was used for, but it's literally like 4 by 4 meters, a single room. I get to the wall of this field, and I can just tell that the sound is coming from there, literally straight across the road from my house. I don't go any further. I just crouch down in the darkness and watch this hut, listening to this rumbling, booming heartbeat noise. I can't see any lights or anything. I eventually go home, and I remember shaking so much from the adrenaline I could hardly stand. I don't remember the rest of the night. I guess it just eventually stopped, and I eventually went back to bed and to sleep. Now that's the majority of events I experienced while living there, mostly as a teen. I moved out at 17, still completely unconvinced of the paranormal, and that there was really anything still in that house. No one else ever really seemed to have experienced anything, so I never talked about any of the above with my family. Eventually, my second youngest sister moved out of that house for uni, and all that was left was my youngest sister having only started secondary school, and my mother. Over the last couple of years, and as my youngest sister became a teen, every now and then, while calling my mother for a catch-up, my mum would tell me about how youngest sister's being a wimp and freaking herself out. It started a while ago and was a bit of a running joke. Younger sister was doing typical teenage things. She'd invite her friends over, they'd watch some horror film, get scared and then swear they heard noises, or saw something, or saw lights moving through the house. Just typical shit. We'd laugh about it, and every now and then my mum would have a new story. It got to a point where it was kind of happening frequently. My mum would go out for a drink with friends. Younger sister would call her after a couple of hours freaking out because she'd heard or seen something. The main one I remember was that she'd been home alone in her bedroom on the phone, when suddenly a woman screamed her lungs out right beside her bedroom door. Obviously, she flipped and called my mum in tears. My mum dismissed it and said she'd probably heard the neighbours shouting at each other, yada yada yada. This happened a few times, and we always laughed at younger sister for being a chicken and freaking herself out. We have a friend who's a white witch, and to calm the younger sister down, my mum invited her round to smoke in the house, whatever it's called. She thought this would be a bit of a placebo for younger sister, and for a while, everything calmed down. This lazy also thinks that younger sister is quite perceptible to these things, as she's had some weird results in doing some kind of chant with younger sister. Then I visited my mother a couple years back. We went to the pub, and after some drinks, she admitted something, but made me swear not to tell younger sister. One morning, my mum awoke just before she needed to get up for work. She lay in bed for a few minutes just savouring the free time, and then heard younger sister walk down the stairs. It's an old house, so those stairs creak like all hell. As well as that, there's a baby gate at the bottom of the stairs to stop her dogs from getting upstairs during the night. Surprised, she eventually gets up and goes downstairs. Baby gate is still locked. She looks around. Younger sister is nowhere. Going back upstairs, younger sister is still passed out in her bed. So no one got up and could have walked down those stairs. But yeah, this could have just been some kind of sleep delusion. My mother is most stubborn of us all when it comes to acknowledging the paranormal, but with this, she was very serious. Now, the last story. Skip forward a year. It's been a while and I've been keeping bad contact with them, so I'm not really up to date. These little scares have been happening, but I've heard about nothing major. I finally met up with them again last November for a family/early Christmas thing. On the first night I'm talking to younger sister, and I can't remember if I brought it up or if she does, but we start talking about her experiences. Then she tells me this, and as she tells me this, she's in no way excited or elated or anything. For a 15-year-old, there was no theatrical, just blankly regaling the story, as if to say, now are you just going to tell me it's not true too? She just seems tired and casual about it, and admits that she's sick of all of us never believing her. She says this. My mother's out with some friends. Young sister has 2 of her own teenage friends over, having a sleepover. I think these 2 friends are common culprits for jumping on the spooky bandwagon and commonly freak themselves out. However, this time, they all stood in the kitchen. It's a pretty dark house, so there's only a lamp on. They're talking, standing at the corner of the table, spread out a bit. It's a tall table, so the chairs are quite heavy wooden ones, and when you sit on them, they're tall enough that your feet don't touch the ground. While they're chatting, they hear a scraping noise, and for a second, younger sister can't figure out what it is. She thinks it's the fridge making a weird noise. Then, from in between them, one of those heavy-ass chairs slowly fucking slides out away from the table. I tried to ask her really specific questions here. It seems like it moved about 1.5 meters over a few seconds, so not really fast. But it slides out in a diagonal path away from the table, in between the girls. The chair then lifts onto one of its legs, and younger sister genuinely said it spun around 3 times on that back leg, and then fell over flat, leading down the back hallway near that side of the table. They freaked the hell out. Younger sister manages to take a really shaky picture, but she's late to take it, so it's just of the chair lying flat in the hallway, and that's it. Now I know that seems like a typical lie, told by a freaked out teen, but she's really not like that. And the way she haggardly told me the story just got me. I told her I believed her, and we talked for a long time about my experiences and other experiences she'd had. And that's kind of where the story is left off. To start in typical fashion, I don't really believe in this stuff. I'd like to, and I've had small, strange incidents throughout my life that can possibly be explained, but ultimately are a little beyond the norm. I grew up in rural Ireland, and I think in my teens the idea of the supernatural simply excited me. Being surrounded by old farmers with their strange folk tales, and even members of my family who held defiant stances against the paranormal world, but had inexplicably experienced strange things. I grew up with an eager attention towards these things, but definitely do not hold any strong beliefs. Either way, I've experienced some weird things that may interest some of you. This particular situation is just what happened. I'm implying nothing nor making any assumptions or conclusions. About 5 years back, I lived with my father in the UK over summer while awaiting my uni to start again in September. It was a relatively newish house in a nice residential area of a large town. The house was at the top of a hill, and nearby was a small graveyard. I had my PC set up in our dining room, on the table placed so I had my back facing the large bay window. That night, my father was away somewhere, and it was just me and my stepmother at home. At this point, she was in bed, and it was quite late, definitely after midnight. I got a text that he'd be back in around an hour or two. Despite knowing he was coming home later, while just browsing stuff, I heard a tap on the window. I instantly assumed it was my father, having returned super early. I turned around and couldn't see anyone, but this didn't shake the idea that he must have been home and wanted me to open the door for him. Bear in mind, this was the back of the house, so in the adjoining kitchen there was a back door, only about 5 feet away from the edge of the bay windows, so it made sense for him to be tapping on the window. I get up, go to the kitchen, open the door, and find no one there. I figured, oh well, strange occurrence, and shrugged it off. It was a nice night though, so I just stood in the doorway for a minute and looked at the stars. It was only a minute, but suddenly, exactly where I was looking, I saw a weird shape flash across the sky. It was like a shooting star, but it very rapidly sped in the same shape as a heartbeat monitor makes when it blips up and down, only from right to left instead. As in it travelled in a line from the right, shot up, then directly down, then back up halfway, and off again in a straight line. I felt like I watched it move, but it went so fast that I basically saw the whole shape in one instance. It was about as long as your finger would cover at arm's length. Again, I just thought it was weird. Immediately after, I heard stuff move on the kitchen counter directly behind me. In fact, it made the exact noise of the kettle being placed on its base. So similarly that I just 100% believed that my stepmother had woken up and was putting the kettle on. I spoke to greet her and turned around, only to find the room empty and still. I thought it was weird, but I left things alone and went back to my PC. The night ended normally. Now the next bit is hard to describe effectively, and in my opinion is both more explicable but understandably hard to believe. It may also be totally unrelated to the first half of the story. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I was harassed by a tiny shape. I remember it starting almost immediately after that night, but in no way can remember specific time frames. We had a piano in that same dining room, and in the middle of the day I was sitting playing it. While playing it, I started seeing this little shadow, about 5 to 6 inches tall, dart behind things. For instance, I would see it in my peripheral hide behind my leg. Or I'd be looking at the piano and notice it move behind a picture frame on top. It didn't stay exclusively in my peripheral vision. It would sometimes move around quite close to the center of my vision, but just in areas I wasn't directly focusing on. It wouldn't move across large stretches at first either. More just I would notice it quickly hide behind things, as if it had been peeking out and I hadn't previously noticed it. I remember while playing the piano this first time, over this 10-minute window, it happened over and over, to the point where I became really frustrated and tense. It wasn't frightening at all, but so frustrating that it began stressing me out. This happened, as I said, for about 3 weeks. In this time, I also moved out of my father's house and into my new student house. I was happy to be back with my friends in a free environment, but was still kept on edge by this constant shadow. I didn't mention it to anyone for the duration it happened for. It escalated at one point to where I'd be sitting in a room and see it fly around the ceiling and hide behind light shades, like a bat flitting about. The few times I clearly remember seeing it, I was alone, although it may have happened a few times with other people in the room. And then just as it started, it suddenly stopped. And that was it. I was left alone. I accepted it and moved on. And that's the first of my potential incidents. I was around 6 at the time and playing outside when I suddenly really had to use the toilet. So I'm sprinting to the house to go do my business, and as I pass the front window, a disembodied hand appears on the opposite side of the window pane, clenches its fist and knocks on the window 3 times before vanishing. Me, being a brave but dumb 6-year-old who'd be the first to die in a horror film, makes the wise decision to go inside anyway and ask who's there. Of course, no one answers since my parents are outside gardening, and my other living siblings are also outside playing. Notice how I said living. At the time, I had one other deceased sibling who had died many years prior in that same house. I like to think that disembodied hand was that brother trying to scare me into peeing myself. But joke's on him, because I managed to hold it in. Now, the creepy thing is that after we moved, that house flooded twice before burning down. All that's left is an empty lot. Part of me thinks that my brother stuck around to prevent natural disasters, and once we left, he left too. Cut to a decade later, this is when we get into the really heavy stuff, so be warned. For a couple months prior to my 17th birthday, I had recurring dreams about being diagnosed with cancer, which was odd because it was something I had never worried about before. Then, on my birthday, I had an absolutely terrifying dream that my sister was going to die. It was so vivid that I woke up sobbing, and I even told my mom that I thought my sister was going to pass away soon. She didn't believe me, and sadly, by the time my sister came home, I convinced myself it was just a dream too. I never warned her. That was a mistake. A month later, she died in a car accident. Another weird thing with my sister's death is she seemed almost subconsciously aware that she would die soon, even though it was unexpected and I had failed to warn her. She told my mom multiple times in the months leading up to her death to make sure to let her horse see and sniff her body if she ever passed away, so that they knew that she didn't just abandon them. About a week after my sister's death, my dad's biopsy results came back. This is where the cancer dreams become relevant. Turns out he had stage 4 cancer for a while prior to the diagnosis, the same cancer I'd been dreaming about. Not a year later, he passed away. At the time, I was devastated. It's unimaginably painful to lose 2 family members back to back. I was also dealing with guilt and dissociation. Reality felt unreal, especially with the prophetic dreams blurring the lines between past, present, and future. Sadly, this was not the end of those dreams. Cut to 4 years later, I started having suicide dreams a few months before college winter break. Later, while on break, I found out that my brother had been depressed and suicidal for these same past few months. I talked to him about it and told him that I was there for him and that I loved him no matter what. But I guess that wasn't enough. I thought he was doing better. He had just gotten a new, well-paying job and he had just finished a nice family dinner, something we hadn't had in a while. He went downstairs to his room and I went upstairs to bed. That night, I had another suicide dream, but in hindsight, this one was different from the rest. It felt more like a visitation dream. In it, my brother led me downstairs to his body. He explained to me why he did what he did. Not with words, but emotions. I could feel what he was feeling. He then said that he had to go now, and I woke up screaming. You'd think I would have learned my lesson now, but I guess not. I convinced myself it was just a dream, and I decided to go downstairs to do some laundry. I found his body instead, lying in the exact same position it had in my dream. Because of the way it was propped, I thought he was still alive and went to say good morning, before I realised he had passed. For a few days after, I couldn't sleep, because all I could see was my brother's body. But one early morning it just stopped and I could sleep again. I suspect that my brother was helping reduce my PTSD from the other side. When I was around 6 or 7 years old, and right before my family moved states, my siblings and I were playing outside on our trampoline while our parents were busy doing yard work. No one was inside the house at the time, at least no one alive. Well, it was early afternoon, and we'd been out there for what felt like hours. And I really needed to pee. It was an emergency, and I really did not want to pee my pants. So, I got off the trampoline and made my way to the front of the house, intent on the nearest bathroom. At the front of the house, there was this large window which jutted forward and out from the rest of the house, like a 3D trapezoid. As I was waddling by this window in an attempt to hold it in, I saw a pale white hand rise up from behind the windowsill. The hand was visible only down to the wrist, at which point it looked to be attached to nothing and was suspended mid-air. Initially, this hand was in an open position and looked as though it was about to wave hello. But instead of waving, it clenched into a fist and knocked on the glass. Once, twice, thrice. Then it opened into a splayed position and vanished into thin air. Now at that point, the smart thing to do would have been to book it, but I really needed to pee, and I was curious as to who or what could be in the house. As an added bonus, the room that I saw the hand in was the same room that was attached to the nearest bathroom, so I would have to enter the room anyway in order to do my business. In my astounding brilliance, I entered the house and that room in particular and asked, "Who's there?" Luckily, I didn't get a response. It was at this point that I knew I'd fucked up. I remembered that everyone was outside and that I was therefore the only person in the house. Alone. That was when the fear hit me and I booked it out of there. Needless to say, I decided to pee outside that day. From an outside perspective, it appears as though there are many more neutral or negative encounters with the paranormal, and very limited positive ones. Personally, I think this may be due to what people tend to focus on, and I was wondering if indeed positive experiences were just as numerous as negative ones, but less recognised or remembered. Out of what I believe to be the few truly paranormal experiences that I've had, I can remember only one that seemed positive. Most of the others were neutral, with only a few being negative. I actually had a positive encounter with a hotel ghost, so I would say they aren't always bad to have around. Basically, it was a very, very old hotel that was reputedly haunted, ghost doors and all that. At the time, I was incredibly scared of the dark and of sleeping in new locations. So instead of sleeping, I was on my phone and expected to stay wide awake all night, fighting with my fear. As I was reading my phone and positioned to the window, in my peripheral vision, I could see that the curtains were blowing back and forth in the breeze of the AC. This movement was startling me, so my eyes started focusing on it. Slowly, an apparition started to form in front of the moving curtain. It was translucent but colourful, and I could still see the curtain behind this figure. It was a girl, roughly 11 or 12, with an old early 1900s dress and black shoes and stockings, and her hair braided down her neck. She appeared to be staring out the window. I saw her for roughly a minute before she started to fade from existence, and the whole time I was filled with this deep sense of peace, like everything would be alright. This was odd, because usually the thought of anything paranormal scares the heck out of me. I've never felt such an intensely positive emotion before or since this encounter. At best, I'd liken this to the feeling that people say they feel when they experience a near-death experience and near God. But I wasn't dying at the time. After she vanished, I turned over befuddled and tried to wrap my mind around what just happened. At that point, a face started to literally overlap my vision. It looked like an older man with a thick brown beard. I got the distinct impression that this was the girl's father. Then, the face morphed into that of a blonde woman, and I got the impression that this was her mother. Then the face disappeared, and nothing happened after that, but the sense of peace remained. I was able to sleep soundly through the night, something that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't have been for that encounter.